have a word of prayer. Almighty God, who in thy infinite wisdom and providential goodness has appointed offices of rulers and counselors for the welfare of society and the just government of man, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us, thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of such important trust in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Let thy blessings descend upon us here in this Parliament assembled, and grant that we may, as in thy presence, treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the good of those whose interest thou hast committed our charge. All which we seek in the name and for the sake of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. You take your seat. House resumes and debate continues. Yes, I recognize Honorable Kevin Scott. Honorable Member, I'm just going to ask that you go to the podium over here.
Which one?
Vigilante?
Robinson?
No, that one. Robinson, I don't know that one.
James? Jelani James?
Yes, Honorable Scott,
Jelani?
you may proceed.
I find that making no sense.
Oui.
Good
All
morning.
right, then.
I
Start the
am
sponsors,
Kevin
Eric.
Scott, the Minister for Education, Human
Yes, sponsors
Resource
are with
Planning,
please.
Vocational Training, and National Excellence. Mr. Speaker, may I be permitted to refer to my speech?
Yes, you may do so.
Let me extend warmest greetings to my family, the communities, and especially the youth of the Castro's constituency, the staff and students of the Jones Bopier Primary School, and the staff of the Ministry of Education. Today, I have the esteemed privilege to speak on the topic, COVID-19 vaccine should be made mandatory to enable resumption of face-to-face learning for students. Mr. Speaker, many people have questioned the science behind medical advances in health, including vaccination. Mr. Speaker, why don't the same people question the shots given to their babies and children? Mr. Speaker, many people have gone to the health centers when they are very sick with pains, and they are given shots, in other terms, jabs. How many people have questioned what was given to them? Mr. Speaker, they have taken their jabs and they run back to their home trusting the science. The debate over vaccination has been in the headlines since before 1796, when the first smallpox vaccine was developed. Therefore, I do understand the hesitancy and uncertainty of persons who express their unwillingness in considering mandatory vaccination as a prerequisite for resumption of face-to-face learning in the physical classroom. However, let's not overlook the fact that so many lives were saved because of these inventions and the decisions to have children vaccinated. Since they are the most vulnerable among us here in Dominica, 40% of students ages 12 to 17 are vaccinated, based on statistics from the Ministry of Education. The COVID pandemic is a harsh reminder that the outbreak of contagious and infectious disease can negatively impact the lives and that of our families and loved ones. Every one of us has had to change our way of life for the past 2 years because we experienced the gym effects of COVID-19. Many of us have experienced the loss of freedom, whether socially or related to work. Sadly, some of our loved ones are no longer with us, and we still experiencing interruptions in our daily activities because of protocols which must be followed. What about the inconveniences of sourcing further income to make ends meet, and the loss of instructional time for our children because of the interruption of school activities such as teaching and learning? According to the World Health Organization, vaccine hesitancy is one of the top threats to public health. This means that vaccines are one of the world's safest methods of protecting the well-being of our children and the general public from the life-threatening diseases. We all know that it is the responsibility of the state to safeguard the public's health, which include mandatory vaccination for students to enable resumption of face-to-face learning. So society's misguided concern about vaccine safety could be attributed to the lack of knowledge of how vaccines work. Therefore, let me shed some light on what vaccines do and how they work. According to the World Health Organization, the basic mechanism by which vaccine work is simple. The vaccines create immunity, which is protection in an individual by introducing a weakened form of pathogen. In that case, the bacteria or viruses that make us ill. The vaccine induces acquired immunity so that when your body encounters the real disease-causing agent, it is ready to mount a defense and to put up a fight and get you protected. This clearly shows that vaccination protects the body and saves lives. Also, there is a collective social benefit in high vaccination coverage. For most diseases, the greater the proportion of people who are vaccinated, the better protected is everyone in a population, as diseases transmission can be reduced or stopped. In our case, Dominica compulsory vaccination should mean that approximately 5,989 students at primary school level and 4,709 students at secondary school level would be safeguarded and protected. This is an urgent need to understand that vaccination of children is essential to mitigate transmission of diseases in environments like schools, where vaccine-preventable diseases can be very high. And we all know that, Mr. Speaker. Vaccination in general, and for the return of face-to-face interaction, compulsory vaccination is the most effective ways that students will be able to enjoy academic and curricular activities that the schools have planned and put in place for them, whilst at the same time protecting themselves, their families, and their friends from contracting the deadly COVID virus. It is important to create free and safe learning environments for our students to return to school. Besides, the many protocols that the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education have put in place at schools to safeguard the protection of our nation's children and to avoid the surge of COVID-19 and future closure. We must begin to realize that the best and most effective strategy for the resumption of school should be compulsory vaccination. Mr. Speaker, social interaction is vital for our children's development. Also, psychological and cognitive skills are achieved through social interaction and therefore contribute to the holistic development of every child. Having said that, it is time that we return face-to-face teaching and learning. However, with the number of active cases still present, and the mere fact that you cannot just tell by looking at someone whether they are positive or not, We cannot take the chance to behave as if it's normal and okay to open the school gates, and to resume teaching and learning. Teachers cannot deny the fact that they miss interacting with their students. Students also have the desire to play, interact, and learn among their peers, friends, and teachers. But how is that going to happen if the high possibility of contracting COVID-19 virus still exists because one at school has not been vaccinated from the disease? This cannot happen. Mr. Speaker, compulsory vaccination for students to return to school cannot contribute significantly. Mr. Speaker, compulsory vaccination for students to return to school can contribute significantly to achieving herd immunity. And herd immunity is a community protection that is created when a high percentage of the population is vaccinated, such that it is less likely that the infectious disease spreads. Therefore, compulsory vaccination will not only protect those who have been vaccinated, but also those who are compromised or have weak immune systems. This is a win-win situation for every child and the public by extension. Mr. Speaker, the public is very concerned about immediate return for the students to school, not bearing in mind the health challenges associated with taking such decisions. We are anxious about normalcy, but how prepared are we to go back face-to-face teaching and learning when less than half, which is only 45.1% of our population, are vaccinated? We speak about the dangers and side effects of online learning, such as health problems which include eye issues, headaches, back pains, lack of internet access, and also the costs associated to keeping our children at home. Also, the challenges that impose on teachers in terms of planning and meeting every child's individual needs online. But are you not concerned about your child who may have pre-existing medical conditions which put them at a higher risk of being infected while they continue to be among students who are not vaccinated at school? How prepared are you, your child, your family, by extension, for an outbreak of resurgence of increased cases at schools, simply because students are not vaccinated? Let's avoid these unfortunate circumstances, especially with our children. Get your children vaccinated so that we can return to school. Mr. Speaker, since compulsory vaccination would be considered as a protection and preventative measure for contracting the virus and transmitting it to others, it would also prove far less cost for you, the parents, the government, the healthcare providers, the economy, than treating victims who could be your child or your children after contracting the disease, or cause it to be spread at school levels or community levels. Although face-to-face learning is the most traditional way of learning, it is one of the most effective ways to learn knowledge and skills. The advantages of face-to-face learning in the classroom are not limited to only interaction. Face-to-face learning also helps students to concentrate harder on their own. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Face-to-face learning also helps students to concentrate harder on their learning because they are less distracted at home. They are less distracted in the classroom than at home. In many cases, Mr. Speaker, teachers have been complaining when they were on online, Mr. Speaker, because why? Students leave their device and they're all around the house doing God knows what. Mr. Speaker, given the important role that teachers play in helping students focus on what is important and needs to be learned. For the many benefits associated with face-to-face interaction and learning, it is important that we return to the classroom. Students have spent considerable amount of time away from their teachers, peers, and the physical classroom learning environment, and therefore have missed out on many learning experiences and opportunities to develop personal, social, and cognitive skills. Teachers, officers, the ministry, and the public have heard your complaints and concern about your child or children continuing to learn online, and measures have been put in place for the safe return of students to schools. However, this has not been possible. Think of the safe learning environment that you will have to create when your child has been vaccinated and is back at school. Compulsory vaccination will help students to return to school and engage in meaningful and significant learning. Mr. Speaker, I do not have any Bible quote like my colleagues, but I will leave here by saying mandatory COVID-19 vaccination for students should be the gateway for the resumption of face-to-face learning. Let's get back to the classroom.
All right, I recognize, correct me if I'm wrong, but Honorable Benton Julius, correct?
Mr. Speaker.
All right. Honorable Julius, you may proceed.
Honorable Philip Rowe, Speaker of the House, leaders of the proposing and opposing teams, Honorable Hanif Gregoire and Honorable Lakia Joseph, distinguished guests, remote viewers, good morning to all. I, Benton Julius, rise as the Shadow Youth Minister for Education, Human Resource Planning, Vocational Training, and National Excellence to make my contribution to the topic, the COVID-19 vaccine should be mandated for all citizens. Mr. Speaker, with your leave, I would like to refer to my notes while I make my contribution.
Yes, certainly, you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I would just like to touch on a few of the points that the Honorable Kevin Scott brought up. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member said that in order for schools to be reopened, that students need to take the COVID-19 vaccine, that the vaccine needs to be made mandatory. But schools have already been reopened across the island. The Ministry of Education has already implemented a shift-based system that allows students to go to school every day, while fifth form students go to school Mondays to Fridays. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Scott mentioned that the Soufriere School recently closed because of COVID outbreaks. But even if students are vaccinated, that doesn't mean that they cannot contract the virus. Also, Mr. Speaker, as my colleague, the Honorable Gariel Libla, will explain to you in a few moments, with proper regulatory measures, schools can be reopened fully without the need of vaccine mandates. Mr. Speaker, it was John Dewey who once said, "Education is not a privilege to be bestowed by a government. It is a legal right for all citizens, children, youth, and adults." While I agree that vaccination holds some benefits in regards to the protection of students, I strongly disagree with the idea of mandating the vaccine for all citizens because of the negative effect it would have on the availability and quality of education and on student achievement, which can be defined as the amount of information a student learns in a given time frame. Mr. Speaker, proper education, as we know, plays a fundamental role in the development of adolescents and children's skills and knowledge. And schools create the ideal environment for youth to learn and hone these skills. And education is something that every citizen has a right to. But mandating the COVID-19 vaccine for all citizens would make traditional education available only to those who are able to be vaccinated. After speaking with numerous students from various schools across the island, there is no doubt in my mind that a large number of them will be unable or will refuse to conform to the mandate in question. Many of them highlighted religious reasons, medical conditions, and skepticism as justification for their stance against vaccination. Mr. Speaker, according to a news article published on usatoday.com, last year, over 30,000 students in Los Angeles schools did not comply with vaccine mandates, forcing schools to push back their mandates to fall 2022. And according to an article published on November 1st, 2021 on Daily Gazette, the Fulton Montgomery Community College estimated a 15 to 20% decline in enrollments due to vaccine mandates. Mr. Speaker, while these are figures from schools abroad, based on the responses that I received from local students, a similar outcome is very probable for schools in Dominica. Could you imagine if 20% of Dominican students dropped out of school all because of this vaccine mandate? Let us keep in mind those bright, intelligent individuals who would be robbed of an education, who would be wrongfully removed from the education system and subsequently be denied of the prosperous future that they were working to attain. Not only would we be responsible for depriving these individuals of an education that they rightfully deserve, but we would also be responsible for the potential weakening of our future workforce. My opponents may say that arrangements for online education can be made for unvaccinated students. However, Mr. Speaker, I would argue that these students may not have access to the necessary materials for such because, Mr. Speaker, since the students are underage, their parents are the ones who decide whether or not they get vaccinated. And a number of students who remain unvaccinated will have parents who are anti-vaxxers. And seeing that the vaccine will be mandated for all citizens, these parents would be dismissed from their jobs and struggle to find financial stability. Mr. Speaker, how would you propose that these parents pay for food, shelter, water, electricity, internet access, and possibly a babysitter so that their child can attend school virtually if they do not have a steady source of income? I am aware that some parents, not all unvaccinated students, will have parents who are anti-vaxxers, and some parents may only prevent their child from taking the COVID-19 vaccine for medical reasons. However, Mr. Speaker, students do not go to school solely for academic purposes. It is where they go to learn social skills, teamwork, meet and make lifelong friends. Subjecting unvaccinated students to only virtual learning would limit their social interactions with their peers and other human beings. And according to an article published on remote learning on milehighpsychiatry.com, this lack of social interaction can lead to feelings of isolation and potentially the development of mental health disorders like social anxiety and depression. All in all, online learning would not be a sustainable substitute for face-to-face learning for students who do not comply with the vaccine mandate. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you've heard the saying, the youth is the hope of the future. But how can we expect our youth to be able to make valuable contributions to society if we mandate the COVID-19 vaccine and cut Many of them are from the very education that would allow them to grow into well-skilled, intelligent individuals capable of leading our country into the future. Have we not thought of the number of youth who would not only be forbidden from education, but also be exempt from making any contribution to society because of their negative vaccination status, preventing them from joining the workforce? Mr. Speaker, how would we justify our actions? Would we say that it was in order to protect the health of our students? Mr. Speaker, according to an article published on January 11th, 2022 on Statistica.com, the #1 global business data platform, only around 2% of hospitalized COVID-19 patients in the US were under the age of 18 on average since the start of the pandemic. And currently, that percentage has risen to an underwhelming 7%. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, it was found in a study conducted by Iran Lehman of the Berlin Institute of Health at Charité that children's immune systems respond much faster to viruses that it has never encountered, such as pandemic pathogens. Mr. Speaker, I say this to say, school students under the age of 18 have immune systems that are already well equipped against the COVID-19 virus, and they should be given the option of whether or not they take the vaccine for increased protection, and they should not be withheld an education for their decision not to. Now, with regards to primary education, let me bring it to your attention, Mr. Speaker, that according to a study conducted by the New York State Department of Health, the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine, which is the only vaccine currently available for children under the age of 12, provided very little protection for those between the ages of 5 and 11 during the emergence of Omicron in New York. The vaccine's effectiveness against infection dropped from 68% to 12%, and its protection against hospitalization dropped by 52%. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, according to articles published on healthline.com, mayoclinic.org, and health.harvard.edu, the COVID virus causes less severe illness in children, and they are also less susceptible to the virus and are not primary transmitters of it. Knowing this, I would like you to ask yourselves the following questions. Should primary school students be obligated to take this vaccine? And is it right to deny these students of an education simply because they are unwilling or unable to take a vaccine that provides them with little protection against the COVID-19 virus? The answer to both of those questions is no. Mr. Speaker, a large number of teachers remain unvaccinated, and with the mandating of the vaccine, it is very likely that many of them will be dismissed. This poses the question of whether the remaining staff will be enough to teach all the required subjects to the students who do in fact get vaccinated and remain in school. In such a situation, the Ministry of Education would be forced to appoint many new and experienced teachers to combat the shortage. However, Mr. Speaker, this could negatively affect students' ability to learn, achieve, and truly grasp what they are being taught. According to an article published on learningpolicyinstitute.org, a website which provides high-quality research to improve education policy and practice, teaching experience is positively correlated to student achievement. And according to scholars.org, experienced teachers are more effective at increasing student achievement than those less experienced. Mr. Speaker, this means that the sudden increase in the number of inexperienced teachers on the job due to the mandating of the COVID-19 vaccine would negatively impact test scores and academic performance across the island. Meaning that not only will unvaccinated students be robbed of an education, But those who remain in school will also be left with the challenge of learning under inexperienced individuals, making education across the island impossible for some and increasingly difficult for others. Let me now briefly restate the main points. The mandating of the COVID-19 vaccine for all citizens would deprive unvaccinated students of an education that they rightfully deserve and prevent them from making meaningful contributions to society. It would decrease student achievement across the island with the dismissal of experienced teachers and force young students to take a vaccine that provides them with minimal protection. Taking these points into account, I want you to ask yourself the following question.
Please do so through the speaker. Remember, you're speaking through the chair, okay?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Would mandating the COVID-19 vaccine really benefit our students? Or would it only put education out of their reach and put a daunting obstacle in their path to success? Thank you.
Yes, I recognize Honorable Che Gittins, Minister for Sports, Culture, and Community Development. Honorable Gittins, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Speaker of the House, Mr. Philip Rowe, honorable leaders of the proposing and the opposing side, observing ministers, fellow youth parliamentarians, viewers, and the nation at large, I extend a warm good morning. My name is Che Gittins, and I hold the ministerial portfolio of Sports, Culture, and Community Development. Mr. Speaker, before I commence, I seek your permission to refer to my notes for the duration of my presentation.
Yes, that is fine. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed all of our lives. We have seen our situations change constantly, time and time again. From masks to more masks, to social distancing, quarantine, closures, lockdowns, and curfews. It has had drastic effects on our economy, Mr. Speaker, and on our ways of life. We see it every day with 216 active cases and a total of 11,777 confirmed cases as of March 21st, 2022, according to the Ministry of Health. The fulminant strike of the COVID-19 pandemic has come in a time where health development in our Dominica, Mr. Speaker, is now expanding with the new development of the various medical infrastructure around the island, as mentioned by my colleague, Honorable Stefina Williams. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has given us a shock. However, seemingly just as quickly as the pandemic hit our shores, we obtained remedy. Mr. Speaker, we obtained the COVID-19 vaccines. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, a vaccine is a preparation that is used to stimulate the body's immune response against diseases. What does this mean? It is not a 100% cure. No, it is a 100% healing agent. Mr. Speaker, it is a medicinal substance that aids the body in fighting sickness. The COVID-19 vaccines now are mRNA vaccines, meaning that they carry a message to the genetic makeup of a cell, informing it of how to deal effectively with the virus and reduce the risk of mutation of said virus and severe infection of the host. Mr. Speaker, this mutation is what increases the spread of the virus. According to an article published by the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center on December 14th, 2021, I quote, "Mutation is part of being a virus. Viruses mutate to adapt to their surroundings and more effectively move from host to host," end quote. Mr. Speaker, it is via these mutations that the virus is spread, and vaccination stops it in its tracks. It is proven that these vaccines are effective despite the propaganda circulating our social media, local bars, radio, and other means of communication. Pivoting off of this, Mr. Speaker, there are 3 areas that are of immense importance in this matter. Areas that have serious effects on our nation: sports, culture, and community development. Mr. Speaker, after carefully evaluating these areas and analyzing the scientific evidence and local factors, I and the proposing side stand firmly on the notion that vaccines should be made mandatory for all citizens. Mr. Speaker, the area of sports has always historically benefited our country. However, it may be difficult for some to fathom the association between sports and mandatory vaccinations. Allow me, Mr. Speaker, the privilege of enlightening us today. We need to, as a people, firstly understand the benefits of sports on self and on our communities as a whole. Cricket, football, basketball, and the current work in progress, tennis, as well as many others, they keep us and our young people active. They give us something to do, a distraction from the ravaging waves of life, whether by playing them or by observing others play them. However, Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to mention maybe the most important function of sports. That is, these activities act as a source of fuel for our economy. Mr. Speaker, according to the Ministry of Sports, Culture, and Community Development, sports builds career paths and develops human capital via these career paths. One of the most important aspects of our economy, human resources. Scores of people travel regionally and internationally to observe sports. Dominica, Mr. Speaker, is not exempt from this phenomenon. In doing so, they spend money in our currency, in foreign currency, further advancing our economy. We saw this most recently in the OECS netball event from April 11th to April 19th, 2021, as well as in the past, during international cricket matches in the Windsor Park Stadium. Sports players, when they come in, Mr. Speaker, bring about a domino effect on all other areas of life, shooting up, for example, tourism when staying at different accommodative locations. With sporting activities, our own vendors, Mr. Speaker, come together and sell, taking advantage of the large crowds and boosting our economy. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, we have seen what the COVID-19 pandemic has done to our different leagues. The basketball league had to be put on hold. The same fate befell the football league. The volleyball league was postponed since October last year. What will become, Mr. Speaker, of our national sportsmen and women who need constant training and activity? The Basketball Association has seen a rise in depression in a number of their players as their activity has had to drop significantly, affecting their mental health. Many had sports as an outlet, Mr. Speaker. What about these who are in abusive environments and use sports as a distraction or maybe a means to report? According to the American College of Sports Medicine, from a study of 2015, the prevalence rate of depression among college athletes ranges from as low as 15.6% to as high as 21%. Mr. Speaker, is this where we're headed in Dominica? Need it be mentioned that the majority of these sports, if not all, are contact sports in this COVID time? It is clear that we need an immediate and full reactivation of our sporting activities if we want our sporting activities to resume at full throttle. But how? How, Mr. Speaker, can we resume with full effect our sporting activities? Look at us, Mr. Speaker. Haven't you wondered, or maybe you have wondered, what it's like to run across a field in a mask? Mr. Speaker, have you ever played contact sports, social distancing? Mr. Speaker, we have an example right here in this room. For example, Honorable Michael Aline plays football, and he gives it his all. Can he, for example, play with a mask? With the COVID-19 pandemic, how can we provide a safe environment for these pivotal sporting activities to resume with full effect in our nation? Vaccination. Mandatory vaccination. Mr. Speaker, I choose the word mandatory for a singular reason. The methods of prevention of the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, social distancing and sanitation have not been, while well-intended, have not been the most effective. We have approximately 216 active cases in the country, and would you look at that? As my colleagues have stated earlier, around 41% of our population is fully vaccinated, according to the Ministry of Health. Mr. Speaker, we could be providing that safe environment for activities to resume and for our players to return to the field. Due to factors such as vaccine hesitancy, however, we have to deal with the consequences on these important aspects of our nation. It is absolutely clear that the vaccination of the target population, the sportsmen, in as much as the people of the country, is what determines the full reactivation of sporting activities, as we saw with the OECS netball event, where players were all vaccinated and therefore protected. Mr. Speaker, this is what we need. Some may say that mandatory vaccination may divide us. And yes, we want to maintain unity. Yes, I agree. Sports unify us. Sports help us to come together, de-stress together, share together. The COVID-19 virus is stripping away all of these things. What's a virus, right, Mr. Speaker? What we have been doing thus far is not securing this important aspect of our nation. The solution is mandatory vaccinations for quick recovery and protection for sports players and all citizens alike, so that we may resume activity and create a safe environment for all. Mr. Speaker, let's think now about our culture. Our culture has also been drastically affected. Over the past 2 years, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen a large drop in many cultural activities. It is no longer safe for us to host events such as Curl in the Park, Youth Rally, Carnival, and World Curl Music Festival, which brought in thousands of people per year. Mr. Speaker, between 2019 and 2018, the total number of people who came in for the festival was 12,812, according to the Ministry of Tourism. Most recently, Mr. Speaker, we were not able to have our yearly carnival. Instead, we hosted a small, contained event in the stadium for which all attendees had to be vaccinated. After which, by the way, there was no substantial rise in the amount of COVID cases. All of these cultural events, Mr. Speaker, have immense impact on our economy. Local restaurants can earn more via a rise in cultural cuisine. Vendors and seamstresses can gain $1. All of the cultural activities bring people together. They don't just add to our economy. It is our way of life. Mr. Speaker, in this COVID season, our cultural lives have taken a hit. What shall become of the cultural knowledge and abilities of our young people? Mr. Speaker, shall we subject our cultural dances and practices to be lost? Mr. Speaker, I have 2 little sisters. At this rate, will they ever learn the national dance? The skill of making our national wear, will it be lost to the ages? These activities require contact, Mr. Speaker. Thank God for some of our musical artists who have done a commendable job in keeping our culture somewhat alive in these times. Mr. Speaker, we cannot let this pandemic muffle our cultural flair and essence. What can we do? We can mandate vaccines. Mr. Speaker, if we are in hopes of seeing the long-awaited return of these cultural festivities such as Rabbit Fest and Carnival, we must make vaccination mandatory for all. We can mandate these vaccines for all to bring these activities back. We already know that it's possible, evidenced in the cultural event hosted at the stadium for which attendants had to be vaccinated. Mr. Speaker, in addition to sports and culture, we should mandate the COVID-19 vaccines due to factors related to the community development of our Dominica. According to the Ministry of Sports, Culture, and Community Development can be defined as the coming together of people, incorporating their time, skills, resources, and leadership through local authorities to be able to build togetherness, capacity, and responses to common problems. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what better time, given the pandemic and the economic status of the country, to focus on the growth of our community development. With some of the problems that we currently face, vaccine mandates would alleviate the pressure significantly. According to an article published by the Coronavirus Resource Center in August 2021, domestic abuse reports tripled in the Hubei province in China, increased by 40 to 50% in Brazil, and 20% in Spain. I believe I speak for all of us, Mr. Speaker, when I say that I don't want this to be Dominica's reality. With the ever so persistent pandemic, families seem to be stuck at home. With the scarcity of cultural or sporting events to attend, what will it mean for those, I reiterate, in abusive environments? Mr. Speaker, we need to provide a safe environment for them as fast as we possibly can. And the fastest way is indeed vaccine mandates. With the most recent developments of COVID news in our world, we learn that countries such as the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Denmark have abandoned COVID-19 related restrictions. Some may argue that the best route of action is to do the opposite of what I am proposing and the proposal side in dropping mandates and returning to life as normal as these countries did. However, Mr. Speaker, if we want to rebuild our local community right here in Dominica, this is not the way to go. In fact, information from the epidemiologist's office at the Dominica China Friendship Hospital strongly opposes the notion on the basis of evidence in the fact that we do not share the reasons for which these powerful countries do these actions. Our economy is not the same. Our health care is not the same. Mr. Speaker, we are not the United Kingdom. The larger countries may be attempting to achieve natural immunity. Mr. Speaker, some may argue that we should go the route of natural immunity. In fact, honorable member of the opposing side, Honorable Zebediah Maxwell, in her presentation yesterday, highlighted the prospects of natural immunity. However, Mr. Speaker, our own epidemiologist's office here in Dominica is against such notions because we cannot handle the collateral damage on the health of our people that comes with the route of natural immunity. As a result, Mr. Speaker, mandatory vaccination is the way to go. Of course, the question arises, how? How are we going to go about implementing the COVID-19 vaccine mandates? I suggest that we first establish the policies necessary in our various business places. Let us have transparent proof, Mr. Speaker, for the populace of the numbers and information that the vaccine is indeed effective, reduces morbidity and mortality, relieving pressure on the healthcare, and has extensive benefits for all. In addition, multiple vaccination sites should be established in various locations all over the island. Let's take advantage of the newly implemented medical infrastructure. It may be argued that these mandates will cause strife, protests, and division among people, as stated by Honorable Cornelia Adams yesterday. However, I combat this with a question. Mr. Speaker, is it more important than the safety of our nation, the safety of our economy, the safety of our loved ones? Let us hold seminars, Mr. Speaker, so that the people can share their concerns and be given direct answers. Let us propagate the policy terms and provisions via social media so that all may see and understand completely and totally the rationale of the mandate.
Honorable member, you have 3 more minutes to complete your presentation.
Understood, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Speaker, this is how we can mandate these vaccines. In closing, the 3 areas, sports, culture, and community development, bring our people together. They hold us together. Why shouldn't we do everything we possibly can, Mr. Speaker, to provide a safe environment and facilitate the resumption of all activities as previously listed for the good of our country? Mr. Speaker, I think the forced recovery time on our athletes has been long enough. Our beloved cultural activities have been painfully absent for far too long. Our local community is crying out, Mr. Speaker, vaccine mandates benefit all. Mr. Speaker, before I come to a close, I remember yesterday, in the Honorable Cornelia Adams' presentation, she posed the question, and I quote, "If the Prime Minister is opposing mandatory vaccines, who is the other side to want to mandate vaccines?" End quote. Mr. Speaker, we, the leaders of today and tomorrow, stand on that side. debating in this topic in this honorable house today. And maybe, just maybe, the Honorable Prime Minister will come to agree with us. The leaders of tomorrow and today in this initiative. Mr. Speaker, I ask that we keep this anonymous quote in mind. Prepare and prevent. Don't repair and repent. Let's do what we can to establish a safer Dominica, a dynamic Dominica. Thank you.
Yes, I recognize Honorable Gabriel Libla. Honorable Libya, you may proceed. Yes, you may do so.